Hi. I'm sitting outside. I'm going to read now and see if I can get enough light to continue to do this. I'm going to just start from the front of the book and read through the overture. It'll probably be too frickin' long for anybody to hear, but having no views anyway, it really doesn't matter. Alright, here we go. Found Objects, A Young Adult Life by Gerald Stewart. Found objects derive their identity as art from the designation placed upon them by the artist and the social history that comes with the object. Either its anonymous wear and tear or its recognizability as a consumer icon. The context into which it is placed is also a highly relevant factor. The idea of dignifying commonplace objects in this way was originally a shocking challenge to the accepted distinction between what was considered art as opposed to not art. Although it may now be accepted in the art world as a viable practice, it continues to arouse questioning. Appreciation of found art in this way can prompt philosophical reflection in the observer. Alright. The preface. I could go a short distance to the next town, a long way off to another state, or half a world away and be damn near the same as dead to those I used to know. I could always come back and find someone I remembered. If I did, we could exchange lies in the form of half-truths about how well we were doing. The kids I grew up with that died as we approached and crossed over into the age of majority were removed from my life in the same manner as the ones I lost touch with after we scattered from our small town to schools, jobs, and to get the hell away for no other reason than to prove that what we thought about life in a small town was true. I find myself thinking when I return that I should be able to drive down the same streets, go to the same hangouts, and find those people still there, the dead and the scattered. I'd do it and shield myself from the bragging and posturing of the ones who had aged with me. I'd be kind and considerate to the dead ones, so that this time when we parted, we'd both know we had done the best we could in what little time we had. You can make amends with a dead person in a way you just can't do with someone who will later tell a story with you in it that's not at all like the one you would tell. At this point I have to explain who I am. I've done this at least 1,000 times, mostly in fits and starts and lies. It's just background I'll put in here so you won't have to hold on to so many things in the stories trying to string them together. It's pointless to drag it out as it's not profound and it's easy to remember. My name is Gerald Stewart, Gerald with a hard G as in Gary. I come from a small town in central Ohio called Pentecost. It had about 2,000 people in it when I was a kid. My family on both sides moved from eastern Kentucky to central Ohio over the first half of the 1900s. All the kids in my family were born in Ohio, but we're still considered to be hillbillies. My mom and dad divorced when I was little. We lived in a lot of different places as my mother was insane and had to move at least once a year. She never really explained to us exactly why we were moving, no great detail, just a big grand jumbled up statement that came out of a paranoid delusion that built quickly and demanded action. The delusions were different each time, with only the intensity and action she would take in common with the previous ones. During this process, she checked out mentally for a few weeks to a few months at a time. It would be pretty close to the same as not having any parents, at least in the sense that someone was in charge and I could feel I might not be grabbed up and taken to an orphanage at any moment. I overheard my mom, her sisters, and friends talking about giving us to an orphanage. Other times she'd tell us it might happen if the state sees how we're living. In each psychotic episode, well, the manic psychotic episodes at least, we were taken up and would land in some other screwed up situation with new people and new crap to get around. I would just have to take it one day after another or 1 hour after another until something better started happening. Or at least until I got used to the current shitty stuff and could adjust to the new things in my life. I'm not going to go over a lot of that early childhood stuff here. It's one of the things you need to know as a point of reference. I've written about this town and my situation before, and if you read that, you'll have an opinion of it already. If not, then the one you form here will do. Now that I'm nearly 30, if I tell you the same stories I've told you before, they would be different. The past evolves over time. When we speak or write, we have an anchor point which we will we have an anchor point which we will establish to give us a perspective on the past and future. I'm writing this book as if I'm 30, when really I'm nearly twice that age. But for the purpose of this story, it's how I imagine I thought things to be when I was 30. I'm sure to get it wrong in places, and that's fine. Who'd know anyway? I've long since given up reconciling my youth to normal, and it's a good thing I've not been able to do that. I would have had to allow there weren't a lot of loose ends, and I would have had told things I knew weren't true to get that done. I would have had to push things back that were true to exchange what happened for something that was better, more fun, and easier to explain. I'd have made a life that sounds like the stories other people tell about themselves. It's a thing people do to fit in, so they seem more like everybody else. It's how we learn to get by, not unlike any animal that forms social groups. It's how we turn with the running herd. It isn't where we thought to turn, but it's how the crowd moves, so we go along with them doing the same thing, all going to the same place. All of us are connected by this thought of how things should be, but it didn't come from any one of us. If separated from the herd, we'd not claim it. Why do birds build nests the way they do? You can't just say instinct, as the materials they use are found in different places each time. The nest location is specific to a time and place. It's as much instinct as a learned craft and a blind guess. If birds thought about the process after the nest was done, they'd be just like us. In this book, I'm starting out at about age 19 and looking back a bit, then going forward. I'll tell you what it was like for me to be a kid in the 1970s and a young adult into the 1980s. I have no pretensions as this is a universal story. I think people will see themselves in it as that is what people do with stories. Even if what they see is their lives in contrast, they still see themselves in the stories. Each line of text is a tape measure used for comparison. Using that measure is not profound. It's what everybody does. Chapter 1, Overture. I had not settled on much being real when I was 19, as the world I lived in was pretty flexible. It was the way I was raised, and it had its advantages. At least I could work with the outcomes. I was not bound to one reality defined by religion or moral absolutes that were assumed and not spoken as is typically done, or typically appears to be, I should say, as I have nothing to which to compare it, having spent my entire existence inside of only one skull. It was not a bad way to live, to be, as it was the only thing I knew. I didn't start out understanding this was what I was doing. It was just what I was able to do, all things considered. I had 4 brothers, 2 older, each of us a year apart, 2 younger, coming about 5 and then 10 years after me. My mother had a major mental illness. We never said it at the time, allowing the hard circumstances of her life made her act as she did, but to admit that then, to hold it to be true, was just too awful of a thing. So it was not allowed to be a fact. We deformed a world around her, and she became a tragic thing in what was a crazy world. We 3 older kids were born in successive years, starting in 1954. Andy, Craig, and I adapted crazy, made a way to impose a little order and to keep things moving. We were smart kids who did not so much figure out that approach in an ordered and considered way as much as it just made sense that the only way to act was to keep things moving, to go on to the next thing. I could not live forever as the kid with the messed up everything, clothes, house, family. I was the kid who was not in that moment but moving to the next, collecting experiences to use to make a different place to be. I just had to hold in my mind that it was coming soon. The good thing was out there and it would show up if I just held on a while longer. At different points that I could not predict, large chunks of my life, what was before became definable as a single thing. A single thought contained and expanding under a simple definition. Things would end physically. We'd move, people would die, we'd suddenly have no money, my mother would divorce, whatever. Something was always breaking, falling apart. One thing would end and another thing fully formed would pull me in, encase me in a stifling, slow motion of hyper-awareness ameliorated in degrees as I fit into the new setting. Learned the absolutes, practice where I was now. I learned to handle crazy as a thing that created realities, turned itself into places I had to be in which I had to function. I knew it for what it was, and don't have to poke it full of symptoms and diagnoses to make it another thing, or to offset the impact it had at the time. Here's a little story to make the point about crazy incarnate. How it interacts with people in the real world, the kinds of things crazy can get a person into by what it sets into motion. I saw my dad murder my mother by strangling her with his bare hands when I was 4 years old. She went limp and fell to the floor. I saw her dead there for a few seconds. Then she moved and cried, returning to life, to make a quick statement on the subject of being dead. It was a powerful speech, not due to the content, but because a recently dead woman was making it. As far as I knew at the moment he strangled her, she had been killed, and I had seen it done. I had a mother who had risen from the dead. She was marked by that event, the resurrected frail one, who could disappear again at any time. Her death became her most treasured friend and confidant. It led her through life. A person needs compelling tragedies to create a relative value for other things so they can be called good. Shitty feels good, as it sets something up so it can be called good. That's the problem with shitty as a jumping off point to a good thing. You have to get there first before you can jump. At 19, I began to understand this. I began to think about how others saw and processed things, how they came to understand them maybe, but more how they used them to create their lives, that bad was the outside edge of good. It was at 19 my life stopped for a few seconds. Then it took an abrupt 90-degree turn and went another direction. I just said 90 degrees, as that seemed to be the angle that got me farthest from what I had been. It's just an image anyway. I didn't go anyplace. A girl I knew named Kat was killed in a car wreck, making me wish I'd mentioned to her that I wanted her to be in love with me. She did not rise from the dead as I expected she should have. It was inevitable I would hit something such as this, run into a major event in my life, made major because of the way I saw things associated with all that had led up to it. It was inevitable there would be a correction, a way to bring all into alignment and make sense of things, even if it was only in a storytelling way, a way things stacked up and worked out, not the kind of sense that one means when speaking of gaining insight or true knowledge. That things would fall apart in a predictable way was expected. That they would be replaced with other things was expected as well. Things go as they go until they break. They are no longer sustainable. That's when we change. When she died, I knew the shitty places I had to go with it. I knew how to get there and how to get back. I always traveled alone. It was good. No one could keep up with me in the way I needed them to anyway. I've noticed the past we create in our stories is to rectify us, to make us whole, a complete thing. It's used to make us the things we want it to appear as in those times. It's sold by creating bold actions and excuses. All of these things leading to a point we defined as an end. To do this, we invent our past in the style of legends that we as minstrels perform to the people passing, people who paid little to no attention to what we're saying. We recite Beowulf in a dead language, so even if those people did hear every word we said, they'd never know if we told the story wrong. We have no experiences in common, even the ones we lived through together. They weren't the same for any two people. We're compelled to create a narrative to be our life, to sing our whale songs in the depths of the ocean, or to compose variations within a range of a bird's melody. Telling a story is not about a communal truth. It's about allowing your internal dialogue a place to live outside of your head, to remove the abbreviations and force all thoughts into words, coherent sentences. If I tried to define myself in a manner that connected in many ways to what another knew, I'd not be telling my story. I'd just be trying to make a friend and fit in. Sometimes when it was possible, I told what I knew for sure in the brief way we were allowed to communicate with others, and I was a poet making a scene of a moment or a feeling, not having to give it a plot or a reason. Here's another truth to know. Understanding reality is the creation of reality and morality. You make it up. Design it as it's needed to make sense of what's going on around you at the time. If you take what might seem like an extreme point of view, such as believing flying saucers have contact with you and make things happen in your life, then you've identified as a bit of an outsider. But what you think and how you react to that thought is no more or less valid than the person who believes the same thing about Jesus or not eating red meat. Insanity, dedication, intensity, religious fervor, each really is a measure of how much company you have with your idea. Then how much you buy into it and try to make it stay the same forever. A person mostly stays with an idea to have company. to make and keep friends, the truth being those friendships and not facts. If you are fervent and alone in what you believe, you're just plain nuts. If you try to make it rigid, don't allow it to evolve, and are not prepared to walk away from it at some point, at the point it just makes sense to walk away because there's nothing else left to know, or it's taking away too much time from other things, or you move and you can't connect to that idea anymore where you now live, it just ruins it anyway. You might as well abandon it. An idea, a point of view is a lifespan. You can press it in a Bible like a flower between pieces of wax paper and save enough of it to remind you of what it once was. But it still becomes something else, a flat, dry thing. You have to read like a fossil with a point of reference in the past to understand. In my late teens, I was at the end of 100 things not making sense. I started narrowing down to a few things not making sense. The death of Kat meant I could no longer avoid my own mortality, as I could not make her death go away. I could not stop her from being dead. I should thank her, as her death became my friend. I should thank her as her death became my death. A friend I kept at my side, accepting it as part of me. When death is your constant companion, you expect each thing will end, and without effort you'll find other ones.